Hello, and welcome to The Conversation, a series in which I speak with people involved in amazing ministries here in Ireland and beyond. In this episode, I will be speaking with John Donovan about Ellen Organ, known as Little Nelly of Holy God, a little girl born in County Waterford, Ireland, over 100 years ago. Pope Pius X heard about Little Nelly and her powerful story, and he made it possible for children to make their first Holy Communion at a much younger age. John Donovan, you're very welcome to The Conversation.
Thank you very much, Aidan. I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
John, you're here to tell us about Little Nelly of Holy God. Who was Little Nelly?
That's right. Little Nelly of Holy God, her actual real name was Ellen Organ, was a little girl born in Waterford in 1903. She lived a very short life, died only 4.5 years old in Cork in 1907. But in that short space of time, she made a huge impact, is on the road to sainthood, and actually her name came to the attention of the Pope at that time, and she was instrumental in changing the rules.
And wow, 4.5 years of age, she died, but her life is considered so significant.
Absolutely.
What aspects of significance are there?
Well, Nellie's story is very much a story of the Eucharist. The essence, I guess, of why we are here 120-something years later talking about her, and why she has been known for all of that time, is that Nellie received the Blessed Sacrament at the very young age of just 4 years old. And that is something that was unheard of at the time. And it happened because Nellie impressed those around her and impressed the priest at the time, Father Bury, who spoke to the bishop and got special permission to do so.
And as I understand it, she had quite a bit of suffering in her life, but she was especially cognizant of the fact that our Lord suffered.
Yes. Nellie had a tough time. She died of tuberculosis, which she had contracted from her mother, who died not too long previously. She actually died in an orphanage in the Good Shepherd Convent in Sunday'swell in Cork. She was placed there along with her sister Mary, and there was also 2 brothers who were sent to other religious institutions because at that time her father was in the army, and they looked after Nellie. While there, she was frail from the start. On arrival, she was sent to the Mercy Hospital in Cork, suffering from whooping cough, and spent 2 months there. But when she returned on the feast of Mary Magdalene in May, she immediately made an impression in the nuns in the Good Shepherd. And one of the things that appeals to me, I guess, about Nellie is she's a precocious little girl. We have a lot of her sayings and her story, and I suppose with a childhood innocence, she always asked why on things. But the one thing she never asked at all or questioned at all was Jesus, or as she preferred to refer to him, Holy God. Holy God to Nellie actually was the child of Prague statue. And we have here in front of us today the actual statue that Nellie had in the Good Shepherd Convent all those years ago. But she related to Jesus as Holy God, had a personal relationship with Jesus as Holy God, and from the age of 3 3/4 onwards was beseeching to be allowed to receive Holy Communion. And she was suffering, very, very sick in the infirmary for most of her time. But even at that young age was offering up all of this suffering. She said, Jesus, my suffering is nothing to what you suffered on the cross for me.
So she's a little girl of deep holiness and love for the Eucharist, and we'll certainly get to that because that is the substance of this programme. But what was life like for her family and her in Ireland at that time?
Ireland at the turn of the century was still, I guess, governed from London at this time. times were tough. I mean, you're talking the end of the Victorian era. She was born in 1903. Her father was serving with the army at that time, and the family was located at her birth in the married quarters in the barracks in Waterford City. Soon after Nellie was born, it became apparent that her mother was not very well, and she had effectively TB. And fresh air is known to be very good for this, and getting better air than I suppose the city was providing was a priority. So when Nellie was 2, they moved to the barracks in Spike Island in Cork Harbour, where there's no scarcity of fresh air. And she lived there, I suppose, somewhat comfortably in that, her father was a soldier, there was income, but all changed with the death of her mother when Nellie was just 3.5. And now William Morgan, her dad, was faced with having to mind 4 young children and keep down a job, and it proved impossible. And long story short, the 4 children ended up being sent to various institutions, all religious, to take care of them until I guess they were 18 years of age or so. Nellie and her sister Mary ended up with the Good Shepherd Sisters in Sundays Well in Cork, and she spent the last 8 months of her life there, but it was a very impactful 8 months.
And you were mentioning earlier about the Child of Prague statue and her love of the Eucharist. Although she died at the age of 4.5, take us through that journey, because it certainly is a journey of depth and deep spirituality, considering what you told me earlier before the programme began.
Well, I guess Nellie's spirituality was cradled in her mother's bed, and because her mother was poorly for a lot of that time, Nellie was in the bed with her, and it was there she learned the rosary and her prayers, and she prayed to Holy God from a very young age. It's interesting that in Waterford, where she was born, is just across the road from Mount Sion, where Edmund Rice is buried, and it was across to the church in Mount Sion that Nellie used to be brought every morning by her dad for Mass. There's a story related that the last thing they used to see on the way out from the barracks was a kind of a bunker known as the lockup. And the lockup was where, I suppose, the soldiers that needed to cool their jets a bit after a night out in the town the night before, or if they were not feeling great in obedience terms, would be put in to calm down. It was a small cell. And, even in her very early times, when she subsequently ended up in Good Shepherd Convent, Nellie would ask to be brought down to the chapel, and she loved seeing the Stations of the Cross, but she always particularly was drawn to the tabernacle. And I love the fact that in her innocence, in talking to Nurse Hall, who invariably was the person who brought her down, she often said, "I don't like the fact that Jesus is in the lockup." She felt that Jesus was confined by this small box. For Nellie, the Eucharist should live in the greater world, outside, not confined.
And I understand that you had a great sense of the presence of Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. She could sense when Christ was not in the tabernacle, in other words, he was exposed on the altar for adoration purposes, or if someone had visited her after receiving Holy Communion, she could sense the presence of Christ.
Absolutely. Nellie spent, in her time in the Good Shepherd, she really lived in 2 different places. One was in the infirmary cottage, which was a cottage on the outskirts, primarily to stop infection from spreading to the main body. But in latter months, she spent in the main convent in Nurse Hall's room. Either of them were removed from the chapel, and there were many instances of the nuns reporting that Nellie always knew when the Blessed Sacrament was exposed, even when it was exposed at non-scheduled times. She often said, bring me over, I want to see Holy God. I suppose the most poignant instance was Nellie frequently asking the nuns or the attendants dealing with her. Obviously they went to Mass every morning and they had Holy Communion, and she craved the presence so much that she would ask for a kiss of the person who she knew had recently been to Holy Communion. Most often this was an attendant girl called Mary Long, and Mary invariably went to Mass every morning, came in, and as soon as she entered the cottage of the infirmary, Nellie would call her over for the kiss. One particular day, Mary didn't get to Mass. She may have been out a bit too late the night before herself or whatever, but she bypassed Mass and she came straight to the cottage. When she came to the cottage, she opened the door, closed the door as usual, and made her way automatically over to Nellie, as was now a ritual. And as she approached her, Nellie admonished her, put up her hand, and she said, "No, Longy, not this morning. You don't have Holy God." Now, nobody told Nellie that Mary Long had not been to Mass that morning. Nellie had a sense of this.
So, often how God reveals his presence to holy ones, to people of deep faith, through his, childlikeness, as a child.
Yeah, and I think it's very appropriate. I mean, we are dealing with a child here in Nellie. So, it would make a lot of sense that a child would relate to a child. And I think that maybe it's Holy God's way of also telling us that children, suffer little children to come unto me. And, Pius himself said there will be saints among the children. So, the age of reason is a big part of this story. And I think there's lots of little breadcrumbs along the trail here where we like to get hints from above that, there is wisdom in children.
Nellie made her first Holy Communion. Take us up to that event and then her short life then afterwards.
Coming up to the end of 1907, Nellie by now was pretty much bedridden and suffering from lots of medical issues, primarily the tuberculosis, but also she had caries, a disease of the gum, which in the absence of antibiotics, a bad tooth could lead to a very painful situation, and did in Nellie's case. Nellie was all of the time longing for Jesus. And, because she was so ill, Bishop O'Callaghan came into the convent one day at the request of the nuns, and he confirmed Nellie. And this reinforced in her, she's recorded as saying, "I'm a soldier of Jesus now." Certainly being a soldier of Jesus was still a thing in my time receiving Holy Communion. We don't hear it a lot now, but she was a soldier and she was ready for the fight. And this meant something to her. So, but of course her health was failing her. And she was longing to receive Holy Communion. But this was impossible. It's little known, I guess. Most people now receive Holy Communion at 7 or 8 years of age. But at this time, it was more commonly 12, 13, 14 even years of age when people received it. Because the view is that, children didn't have enough sense to do so. But there's a lot of power. Bishops have a lot of power. And Nellie, I suppose, went on and on about it to such a degree, and she impressed the nuns so much that there was a retreat coming up given by a Jesuit called Father Bury from Dublin, who was down to give the retreat, and he got to hear about this little girl, and he spoke to her extensively, and he interviewed her, and she impressed him immensely, and she gave, deep answers to questions in terms of her understanding of the real presence. Nellie, for instance, Jesus, who is Jesus? Jesus comes in my tongue and goes down into my heart. What is communion? It is Holy God. It is He who makes the nuns and everyone else holy. He impressed her sufficiently, and she pressed him and he pressed her, that he felt, this girl is worthy of Holy Communion. And so he heard her first confession. And he was, even though he was only a visiting priest, he felt compelled to write to the bishop across the city and request the bishop's permission, because it was in the gift of the bishop, if he so desired, to grant special permission to give this little girl Holy Communion.
John, we're going to take a break just now, but we will see you back in a few minutes when we will hear more about Little Nelly of Holy God. Welcome back to the conversation, where in this episode I'm speaking with John Donovan about Little Nelly of Holy God. In part one, you were telling me about Bishop O'Callaghan and the fact that he had confirmed Little Nelly. So then he was considering the appropriateness of giving Nelly First Holy Communion.
Well, the request came from the convent, from Father Bury, who put forward a good case and had examined Nellie thoroughly and was impressed with the answer she gave. And the bishop himself reported later that he just felt inspired. He recalled the girl from a few weeks ago that he had confirmed. He inspired to grant permission to give Holy Communion to this child. And so it was in early December of 1907, there was great celebrations and jubilation when little Nelly was received Holy Communion at the age of just 4 years. I guess I always find it significant. Nelly actually didn't survive for very long after that. She was to die in February, but she received communion every day for the rest of her life. Had to be brought to her in her room most of the time. She was too ill to come down, but 33 times, and I think it's a significant number. She received once for every year that our Lord spent on this earth. And nowadays receiving Holy Communion, I guess, is, a lot of us are guilty of, well, it's an hour. Sure, maybe we can consider the half an hour before the priest gets to that point, and we'll refrain from eating food and fast for a half an hour. At this time, you'd fasted from midnight the night before. And Nelly did this. And, it is very well documented by the nuns who were by her bedside almost continuously at this point, talking of her suffering, of her silent prayer. She ate nothing else in contemplation and often would spend most of the night awake praying in anticipation of receiving Holy Communion the following morning. Lots of things emerged in this period as well about Nelly, supernatural things, if you will. Like, this was a big convent, a huge orphanage, and nearby was a mother's home. There was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people involved here. And yet this little girl at that time had the undivided attention of everybody, right up to, the Reverend Mother, the Bishop, the priests. And people started to hear about her and came, we've recorded instances of priests coming for blessings to her. And that's one thing, but she had no problem in doing it. She'd dip the hand in the holy water and bless them on their forehead, and many favours requested and granted of little Nelly at the time. The nuns were beginning to record what she was saying, and there's one instance where one of the sisters said to Nelly, she asked for a favour for 2 sister nuns of hers who were not well at the time. And, I suppose the stock answer would be, yeah, no problem, sister, we'll sort that, Nelly said, I'm afraid, sister, one of your friends is going to make it and the other is not. And I need hardly tell you, but that's exactly what did happen. Towards the end of January, Nelly was getting very sick and actually, began to talk about her own death and spoke about it with no fear, only, she was going to fly to him. In fact, in the last Sunday in January, she related she was going to fly to him in her white dress and into the arms of Jesus. And that prophecy was actually very accurate, because on the 2nd of February 1908, at about the hour of 3 o'clock, and 3 o'clock is a significant time in Catholic calendar, Nelly fell into quietness, and she lay in her bed, her eyes were opened, her 2 hands were out, and she was focused on something about a metre, hovering about a metre from the end of her bed. And this went on for a full hour. Most of it she was very quiet, very still. It was evident she was deep in contemplation, deep in prayer. And towards the end of that hour, Nelly mouthed some prayers, and at 4 o'clock exactly, after 1 hour, she did exactly as she had foretold. She went to Holy God and was very happy to do so. There were 3 nuns present for the whole duration, and they were in no doubts that they had witnessed something extraordinary. In Rome at the time, the Pope was Pius X, no ordinary Pope, Saint Pope Pius X. And he was wrestling with the idea of children and the age of reason at this stage. And not too long after, considering how far away Rome is from Ireland and the lack of modes of communication like we have today. Rome is a long way from Cork. But quite soon after Nellie's death, accounts of her life began to be published. The main one was written by a Dean Scannell, who was actually Bishop O'Callaghan's secretary, the diocesan secretary. And he was present towards the tail end of Nellie's life. An extraordinary thing was happening in Cork as well. Nellie, when she died, was brought to St Michael's Cemetery in Ballyfahan, down in the city centre. And very, very soon after she was placed in St Michael's, word of this holy girl came to light. People began visiting the grave. And there are many, many records of people coming there, asking for favours, arriving on crutches and walking away from the grave and leaving offerings behind. So much so that it became almost a contention with the civil authorities. They could hardly close the cemetery at 8 o'clock in the evening, people wanting to stay there.
Take me to the time when the Pope heard the news of little Nellie. I think it was her passing, wasn't it? And the statement that he made.
Well, I think it's relevant because Dean Scannell, what happened was the situation in St Michael's was such that the nuns and the authorities decided to reinter Nellie. So in preparation for that, in February, a year after she died, to examine and make sure that everything was safe to do so, 4 people, including the Reverend Mother and Dean Scannell, reopened her grave, and they found that she was intact a year and a week after she had died. They put everything back together again, but they went off and made the preparations to move her, and some months later in September they moved her. But this all prompted the bishop to really investigate this story, and Dean Scannell wrote a very detailed account, which got published in Roma, a journal in Italy at the time, and very soon afterwards in the Vatican it is recorded that Pope Pius was at his desk one day with Mary Del Val, his secretary, and this account of little Nellie's life came in front of him. He read it with great interest, and he is recorded as saying to Del Val, there it is. That is the sign for which we've been waiting. And very, very shortly after that, we know that Pope Pius was promulgating his decree, Quam Singulare, at the time. In August 1910, just 2 short years after Nellie's death, Pope Pius decreed that children, the age qualification for children's receiving Holy Communion would be lowered. And the absolute catalyst demonstrated in forming this opinion and confirming it in the Pope was this little girl, little Nellie, an Irish girl.
And interestingly, through the years since 1910, the millions and millions of children who have subsequently received Jesus in Holy Communion, perhaps it may have not been so had it not been for Nellie's self-sacrifice and Nellie's short life.
Oh, I think it would not have been so. I mean, it has been demonstrated, the Pope himself said that is the sign. So it may have come out in a slightly watered down format, or who knows, but everybody has a lot to thank little Nellie for. And actually we have 3 instances of Pope Pius writing about Nellie, and I have one of them here with me today. This is a letter written in November 1910, just a few weeks after Quam Singulare, where he's writing back to the children of the Good Shepherd Convent in Cork, thanking them for a letter they had sent previously, because they thanked the Pope for lowering the age. But he proposed Nellie as a model for all children receiving Holy Communion. And for generations afterwards, Nellie's room was frozen in time in the Good Shepherd Convent in Cork, and a ritual for many children, Irish children and even overseas, was to come and visit Nellie's room and visit her grave in preparation for communion. And
you have some very significant items associated with little Nellie here with you today.
I do. Unfortunately, Nellie's room is no longer with us, but they were saved. The Good Shepherds sold the convent in the early 90s, but almost all of the items in her room were saved. I'm lucky enough to be in possession of many of them. Nellie's statue is one, the Pope's letter is another. Just by way of illustration, that is how big Nellie was. This was a shoe that she wore in Sunday as well. It's tiny. I've endeavoured to put my own 4-year-old grandchild's foot into this, and it wasn't happening. It's much smaller than that. I suppose one poignant one is this fragment of oak, which is when Nellie was reinterred, the original coffin. Nellie was in good shape, but the coffin wasn't actually necessarily when they reinterred. So they gave her a new coffin, and the original coffin that she was in for a year and a half was broken up. And I've been given talks on Nellie, and many people come and they say they have bits of it. This is one I'm lucky enough to have. A really important piece that has survived is a tooth of Little Nelly in this reliquary here. And very often I'm asked by people if they can get a blessing with this. And this tooth has brought me to ICU units in hospital where children just a few days old are dying, and it has brought me into the deathbed of very elderly people. And I have been privileged to witness every time that I have done so, the peace that the presence of Nellie can bring, and how, the Blessed Eucharist is with them in a very tangible way through this aid. I really would like people to get to know Little Nelly and to get to pray for her canonization. The very first step on this is to make her a servant of God. This process begun once before, very shortly after Nellie's life, but World War II and the deaths soon after of both Pope Pius and Bishop O'Callaghan deprived the whole process of the two key drivers, and the world was at war. There was other considerations. It is significant though that Nellie has never gone away. Her story has survived down through the years. There hasn't been a decade since she died when there hasn't been another new book and another new book. So people can communicate with me from all over the world when they hear I have these items looking for some little relic of Nellie or prayer or help. So we have an association which is devoted to promoting Nellie's cause and doing it correctly. And a key part of that is that Nellie would pray this prayer for her canonization, specifically to Nellie, for Nellie's cause and for favours that they may wish to receive. And we'd love anyone who would like to communicate with us to advance the cause of Nellie in any way. We're happy to give talks or let people give access to the items. John Donovan, thank you so much for coming to the studio today. It's just amazing to hear you talk about little Nellie of Holy God. And please God, she'll be made a saint someday. Well, a saint is somebody who's in heaven. I'm certain this 4-year-old girl lives there. Thank you, John. Thank you. That's it for this episode of The Conversation. Please join us next time when again I'll be speaking with people involved in amazing ministries here in Ireland and beyond.